Okay. Huff a day, everyone. I told everyone I'm after lunch. I'm going to be fighting for my life up here to keep you entertained. My name's Christine Camacho Farron. I'm the Forestry and Soil Resources Division Chief for your Guam Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Soil Resources Division. I can't see any of you, so I can't even gauge the crowd. So let's go. I start every presentation or most presentations with our mission to protect, conserve, and enhance our forests and soil resources. And there's lots more language to it, but we all know, for everyone working in this room, these aren't small missions and you can't do these alone. So silo working must be broken down, more outreach, more branching, more in-reach within our own organizations and partnerships to see successes. So today I'm going to introduce you to our forestry team, to the division, because some of you, many of you, I actually don't see in our offices. So if you haven't met me or we haven't ever seen you come into the Guam Department of Agriculture or the forestry office and you're doing terrestrial work or any kind of conservation resource management work, kind of obligated to come in and check in, don't you think? Let us know you're doing something in our backyard. We work for the people. And so if you're not engaging with us, today is your day to introduce yourself to us. And forestry staff, can I see you? Stand. Stand. We're missing a couple of people, but we are a very small group with a huge mission. So anytime we can partner, like I said, that's where we can do some real magic. First off, just to introduce you to our new look. If you haven't seen it, this was the original logo when I started. Isn't it lovely? When I had the honor of taking the position of chief, one of the first things we settled down to do as a team, was to identify a new logo. So this is your new forestry logo. We have, I'm too far from I need a clicker. We need clickers, guys. So program icons, I don't want to read these to you, but each piece of that logo is represented, in the icons that we've used. And so for each of the programs within the division, they have huge messages between cooperative fire, forest stewardship, urban and community forestry, and forest health. Representing fire, of course, is the flame, the responsibility of everyone to do their part to protect our ecosystems. The forest stewardship program, what flower is it? It's the EFIT. That one's the EFIT. So representing, this is our community. It's the strength, the resilience. So the EFIT flower represents forest stewardship because it's not something we can tackle alone. Private properties make up the majority landowner on the islands. Or on the island. So when we talk about forest stewardship for Guam, that's the private sector, private families, private lands getting involved. And so resilience, strength, we're stronger with all of you in the community. I'm gonna fall off this thing. Urban and community forestry. Of course, we have the lati, the hut. And so with that, it's the foundation of our community, your home, your street, your village, our One Guam, representing urban and community forestry for Guam. All public lands, schools, parks, government easements, these are the properties that fall into the management under UCF. Forest health is represented by the Gausali. And so with that one, it's a lot of attacks on Guam and across the islands by invasive species. And so a species like the Gausali growing along our cliff lines, resilient against wind, strong, high water, salt, you name it. What a wonderful representative of the forest health program for your forestry division. Okay, wait, arrows? Okay, wait. Yeah? Okay. Sorry. All right, so forest stewardship program. The forest stewardship program, like I mentioned, represents for the private landowners. The programs that come out of here really support technical guidance. We've had great success working with our partners through the University of Guam, through GPEP, the Guam Plant Extinction Prevention Program, the Center for Island Sustainability, Sea Grant, and through them, we've had, through university, we've had Compass interns, Kupu members, AmeriCorps members, many, many rounds of exposure to the technical staff that we have in forestry, and the ability to see summer interns from the high schools come into our programs, summer with us, go over to UOG, and come back multiple times over. And so we have another team member who's new to the team. Elisa, stand up. Stand up. I can't see. Is she here? There she is. Okay. Elisa is an example of a summer intern who came to the your Department of Agriculture, and she interned. Then she went over to UOG, was a G3 Conservation Corps team member, then came back as Kupu, and now she works for Smart Tree Specific, which is how we actually direct and delegate our urban and community forestry program work. So a way to address the challenges of capacity and having technical staff, or a lack thereof at the time, our department, we opted to direct money to Smart Tree Specific out of Hawaii, and they hired locally team members to implement our urban work. And it's all in support of our forest action plan, the 2020-2030 Guam Forest Action Plan, which you haven't seen it. It's a dynamic read. It's amazing. You should pick it up. You should have it bookmarked. Yeah, we all know how plans are. So I got to move on. I'm sorry. Guam Forestry UCF program, just some images. So we are arboreal. You will see our team members up in the air. And there have been many great programs coming out of UCF, like I just talked about. First one, connecting new partners to help us with the mission, but also bringing in training. And our baby of a program, which is the most amazing thing, is the MICC sub-grant program. So we wanted, our goal, before reaching out to Smart Trees, one of my requests was, I want to hear more people talking about forestry. And the urban forestry program is the one way many will see forests. It's the one time in a snapshot, someone may talk about a tree or be exposed to natural resources. It's a tree in the parking lot. It's a tree on the median. It's a tree in the park or at school. And so how can we get the community talking about urban forests, which opens the gateway to stewardship, to more awareness and education and spreading of opportunity? MICC subgrant was the way for us to do that. We brought in funding and then awarded through competition funding to the community. So pots from 10,000, I think this was like a $28,000 pot in total, roughly. And it awarded 4 programs or 4 projects the first year, another round of projects. And we'll continue to do this for as long as we're given the funding. So you'll see us move and expand through urban forestry as well. Forest health, I do not currently have a forest health program manager. So we work with our Guam Department of Agriculture biosecurity team. And so biosecurity has been helping us with the implementation of forest health projects. So if you know anyone looking for a job, wanting to work for your department, work for the people, give me a call. We need a forest health person because Asia Lynn doesn't want to do it now. She loves the fire program. So our cooperative fire program, all of your forestry crew are actually wildland firefighters. They are law enforcement and they are wildland fire investigators. So yes, we do investigate fires. There are triggers that bring us into the field for investigations. And yes, we can find where they originate. So it's amazing. We do a lot of great stuff. This is our RAWS, our remote automated weather station. It's located in Dandan on the NASA property. So this helps us and the weather office get some much needed information from at least one point in the south. Am I too far? I think it died. It says participant has enabled translation. Do I do anything with that? It's not advancing. Here, I'm gonna stop clicking because then it's gonna go to the end. Now? Nope. Okay. So you may have noticed something. There were 2 slides for the fire program. I was the fire program manager before I was the chief, so it's kind of my baby. So just more outreach, a lot of product delivery with regard to the fire program, place-based education, place-based information, all of our facts and data collection over the years from the 1970s to present. We have mapped fires, and those fires and the mapping effort, a lot of that information goes to Hawaii Wildfire Management Organization. They get funding from the Forest Service to help us with mapping. So it's just another way, like, I don't have a person to do this. I really need this information. And so the Forest Service is like, well, here's a way we can do it. And so for years, we've been routing this way. This is your staffing pattern, and I'm sorry to bore you with this, but it's just a way to show like the way in which we've grown. When I started with forestry in 2015, we had 4 programs. And there were special projects and reforestation efforts taking place. But what we've done is I've expanded the programs to move towards more sections. And then in each section, we will have other ongoing programs and projects. So things like Citizen Forester. The Citizen Forester program started off as a smart tree specific effort in Hawaii. We loved it. Years ago, we were all trained on it, and we brought it to Guam to implement here. 1 minute, holy crap. Okay, we have programs. We have, for every program, we have steering committees and advisory councils. So it's not just the forestry crew or Christine or our director Chelsea making random decisions. This is something that we do based on, one, the feedback from our forest action plan from the advisory council, and then the participants of our committees. So if you've been invited to participate in a committee, that's your chance to come in and give some good, solid feedback to guide the work. To date, the forestry crew alone, we were at 37 wildfires on the last count, just forestry. So that's not counting the fire department and all their individual stations. This team has been active and very, very busy this season. We usually don't hit the double digits like 30s until April. So it's a very busy season. Some images, the crew, it's important that you know what they do. It's not just wildland fire, it's seed collection, it's fixing the roads for our access when people take their off-road vehicles and other roads onto the conservation lands that we need to access and maintain to do our work and continue to protect the sites. These guys are the heart and backbone of this division. And so again, our forestry aides are the heart and backbone of the division. So all the work you see from tree pruning in the community, training, tree felling, safety inspections, fire response, that's your forestry crew. Where is this? It's on Guam. It's Cross Island Road, right? Yeah. Okay. Forest action, again, referring to it, the strategies, this is in the wrong order. The strategies that were identified in our Guam Forest Action Plan were based on challenges that the Advisory Council said that Guam faces with regard to forestry and forest management and protection of resources. So this is a slide you're supposed to see first, all the challenges that were identified. And to address those challenges, we came up with 4 strategies. So if you're going for funding and you're writing, you're missing a beat if you are not referencing the Guam Forest Action Plan and the strategies. Okay. Oh, look, funding. We're going to skip that. So we have a lot of grants, a good amount of grants for this team. We went from 4 grants to over 20 plus grants now in a matter of just a couple of years. Your fires on the island, we average about 211 small fires that become big fires, a big fire footprint over time. And so the total percent on average of percent land burned, area burned, is this 4.36% of total land area on island. That's the annual average for partnerships and collaboration. If you're not on this screen, again, where have you been? And if you're doing research and I don't have a copy of your publication, where have you been? I shouldn't have to go look for your publication somewhere. You should email me. Serving our community. So if I don't have your research, you should send it to me so we can serve the community. And all the ways in our year in review of 2024, if you're not following us, follow us. Where's this site? Osgada. It's a great shot from UOG Drone Corps. Dr. Romina King and her team have been absolutely amazing. When you talk about great partnerships, this is a partner who stops. She says, what do you need? What do you need? You all know that. What do you need? And then we tell her what we need. She's like, okay, we got it. And then we get the products. So it's close up from that landscape shot. If you don't make it to the field trip, which we're having on Wednesday, we're going to put you to work, not planting, maintenance. If you come on out, you'll get to walk these beautifully cut fire breaks, fuel breaks, and do some tree pruning and maintenance work with us. My apologies to all of our mayors on the island. I understand that the names aren't in Chamorro. We will fix this slide. But this is just an example of some of the urban and community forestry work across the island. And this is only based on memory. This is the staff having a little practice exercise, recalling where we've put trees across the landscape. So this is not a map, it wasn't precise and it's missing places. But that's just to show you that we are spread out. Products, place-based, no cookie cutter stamped product here. So check out our office. Everything's free. Everything's online. I'm trying. There. Resources. Take a picture. There's the fire mapping, the Micronesia Islands virtual fire mapping, Guam, Palau, CNMI. They should all have maps. YAP has a map. Pacific Fire Exchange is a good place to get our information. I'm a steering committee member through PFX, so all of our data goes there. Any questions? I think I forgot to say a lot. Did I keep you? Did I lose you? Huh? Oh.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I didn't really have a question, more of just a comment that I interacted with your team a couple years ago at the Migratory Bird Festival, and just wanted to say that your outreach campaigns to me seem incredibly effective. I learned a lot. I really gained a respect for the physicality and everything that your crews do for the island. So thank you.
Oh.
Any other questions from the audience? If not, we'll move into Zoom. Is there any questions from Zoom? No questions. Christine will be sticking around because they think she has another.
I have another presentation. So this was again the introduction, reintroduction to who we are. Go for it.
One more question.
Hi, Chief. I love that you're considerate of the workers and giving recognition. It's so rare. So I applaud you. In addition to that, just to add value, do you feel that, or maybe you have it already, do you feel that apprenticeship programs in your division and the rest of DOAG could be advantageous to help our workforce develop, keep people, and not lose talent?
Of course. So yes, programs that encourage recruitment and or participation to do work with us. That's what I forgot. So we've had Compass members, Kupu members, all of these interns, and then other groups that have stepped in. Serena, where are you? So there's, right? So we've supported a number of students who've come in to do internships through the university and people who've stepped in wanting to just volunteer with us. And so we are a place to try and build capacity locally. And of course, I'm going to want to keep you if you're doing excellent work. So yes, growing those and finding the funding to continue that, definitely advantageous.
Give her, Chief Christine a round of applause. Thank you. So for our next speaker, we have Becky Ostertech from the University of Hawaii at Hilo. Looks like she's with us online right now.
Can you hear me? And can you, let's see, can you see the
We can hear you
slide?
now.
All right, for some reason, there we go. Can you see the slides now?
Yes, you're ready to go.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Aloha, I'm coming to you from Hawaii. And Susan and Amanda, my co-authors, were going to be there this week, but they're not here. So they're listening online, but I'm going to be giving the talk right now. So they're also probably able to answer some questions. And I want to acknowledge first off that the work that we're talking about in Hawaii is this amazing team effort with many, many people involved. And it's been such a wonderful collaborative nature of this project. And because I am new to this group, just want to introduce myself a little bit. This is myself in the middle of the two kids. I'm on the right. And those are my four grandparents. They were all immigrants to the US. I grew up in the Midwest in Chicago. But I've been living in Hawaii for 23 and a half years. And I'm coming to you from the of Waiakea. And this is my office on the UH Hilo campus with a nice rainbow over it. And Wailuku is the river waters I identify most with. And Mauna Loa is the mountain, the Mauna I identify most with. So one of the reasons why we wanted to talk about this at this conference is that we have an upcoming research project that was funded by PICAST on using a functional trait approach based on work that we've done in Hawaii. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. But now we want to try to scale that up and see if it can be implemented to build resilient landscapes in Guam. And Susan Cordell from the U.S. Forest Service Institute of Pacific Islands Forestry is the PI on this. And we want to take the functional trait ideas that we've developed over the last 10 years in Hawaii to see if they could be applied elsewhere. Building ecosystems that may be less vulnerable to things like disturbances and invasion, and involving partners and a lot of engagement with the community. And this project would take two phases. One would be a survey of existing plantations, holding a workshop in Guam. So we hope to come at some point soon, and collecting information and discussing with different people what are some of the key tree species that would be good for restoration in the landscapes, and then starting a campaign to collect trait data on those key native species. And then phase two would be to do a field demonstration at one or several sites of a restoration and see how that might demonstrate if it could reduce fuel loads and fire risk. So the concept of hybrid and novel ecosystems is at the core of our research in Hawaii. And in many cases, we may be in human-dominated landscapes where getting back to a historical ecosystem through restoration just is not realistic because we've crossed some kind of threshold. These historical ecosystems are mostly native dominated. These novel ecosystems are entirely non-native dominated. And this hybrid is a mix between the two. And once you cross that threshold to fully novel systems, it becomes very difficult, a lot of energy to get back on the other side of the threshold. And some of the reasons for that may be extinct seed dispersers, climate conditions that may be non-analog in the future, and just existing climate change, and lack of historical data on what were the original native species in the ecosystem. And in addition, and that gets at this concept of reference systems. We often don't know what the original species were. In Hawaii, I'm sure many of people in this group are familiar, but we're the most isolated archipelago on Earth. And on average, across the entire archipelago, including the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, about one species would colonize every 30,000 years on average. And that led to the highly endemic flora and fauna But humans have come in various forms and brought many of these non-native species, often highly invasive, that have led to the extinction of many species and threats to others. So we now have more non-native naturalized plant species in Hawaii than our native plant taxa. Just an example of the difficulties of getting to all native systems, if you're thinking about restoration, this is at Akaka Falls, a local site where there's a trail and there's some people down here in this bottom left corner on the trail. And we grayed out everything that was non-native. And so you can see there's very little native things in this entire landscape. So getting this back to an all native community in this kind of system in low elevation Hawaii, where there's a lot of development, a lot of propagules and movement coming in, just is not feasible. And so we've been working in low elevation, lowland wet forests on Hawaii Island, where there's been a tremendous amount of habitat transformation from agriculture, from development, from housing, from invasive species. On the left is what it was like pre-human contact. So you can see lots of green areas in this lowland wet forest side on the windward side of the island. And on the right, this pinkish color is non-native dominated vegetation and human habitation. So you can see there's been a tremendous loss of the low elevation forest habitat. And so this loss has led to remnant patches, and those remnant patches often are full of non-native species, many of them which are actually fast-growing pioneers trees or shrubs from around the world that we realize now we can't really do the traditional restoration. And so we feel that embracing this concept of intervention ecology can be useful to do it the best you can, but realize that in some cases you can't get back to the original reference system. And so one of the testable solutions that we've come up with is to develop these hybrid ecosystems of native and exotic species. And we use the Hawaii Weed Risk Assessment in order to choose our species and combining that with a functional trait approach. We developed this into the Liko na Polina Restoration Project relating to growing new partnerships. And this project's goal is to design and create multi-use, self-sustaining hybrid ecosystems using functional traits. And functional traits are meaningful and measurable things that influence growth, survival, and reproduction. On the left here, you can see leaves. They're all shapes and sizes. They differ in their leaf thickness, in their leaf nitrogen, in their size, on their petiole length, all these things that affect how the plant is photosynthesizing and using resources. This is one example. And there's predictable ways that these traits vary across species and across different environmental conditions. So why create a hybrid ecosystem, a mixture of native and these non-native, on this slide we're calling them exotic, introduced species that are not invasive? And in our case in Hawaii, we've got a very limited flora, and the native species are more constrained in their traits. So this is a principal components analysis. The native species tend to cluster in one part of the graph because they're more similar in the traits. These exotic species, these non-natives that are non-invasive, tend to cluster in another part of the graph. And on the PCA is showing some of the traits like nitrogen in the leaves, leaf mass per area, seed mass, maximum height, that are very important in distinguishing the different species. Okay? Many of the exotic species we're using are Polynesian introductions, and we're emphasizing we're not using invasive species here. When you add the highly invasive species to the mix in terms of their functional traits, and this is based on data from 15 different traits in this and the previous graph that we collected, you can see that the invasive species can do a little bit of everything. Sometimes they're like the natives, sometimes they're like these exotics, and sometimes they're actually in new areas of the graph. So we took this information and developed a research project in lowland wet forest in the town of Hilo at Keaukaha Military Reservation. It's 30-meter elevation, and it's a 1,200-year-old flow, which is what sort of saved it from being cleared. So although it's never been cleared fully, it does have invasion by a lot of non-native, fast-growing pioneer species. And we really don't have a true reference site for this system. We don't know what was there before humans got there. We don't have a full picture of that information. But in this lowland wet forest type, we see that it's mostly has species that are invasive that are doing rapid cycling of nitrogen and carbon in the litter fall. They have not very dense wood, they've got large leaves and a crowded canopy structure, so very little light is getting to the forest floor, and there's a heavy litter layer. Whereas the native dominated areas, those native species are more conservative in their nutrient cycling, they grow slower, and they have a more open canopy structure. And so in our case study with Lycopnopalina, we defined restoration goals. We collected information on 15 different traits relating to leaves, wood, and reproduction. We prepared the data, and then we made species decisions using a principal components technique, using the Restoring Ecosystem Services tool. And our restoration objectives were these 5 here: increased carbon storage, resistant to invasion, having native plants regenerate in the understory, a clear understory for training and for using the forest, and low management inputs. And this led us to a strategy of choosing 4 different combinations of species, or 4 different treatments. We have a slow carbon turnover to decrease the rate of nutrient cycling, and another one that's a moderate carbon turnover. So it's not as quite slow, not as conservative, but still not like the highly invasive plants that are turning over nutrients very quickly. And then the remaining species in the mix are either more similar to each other in their functional trait profile, so they're more closely together on the graph that I showed, or they're more complementary, they're further apart. And that led us to 4 different treatment combinations that you can see on this slide. And so you can see that in the complementary assemblages, the species are using more of the graph space than in the redundant, where there's more clustering together. The species are more similar. And we also calculated, if you're interested, functional dispersion, which has to do with how far apart the species are from each other functionally in terms of their traits. We created these experimental communities. We made 16 plots. We cleared a 30 by 30 meter area, and we planted the inner 20 by 20. And then we started this experiment in January 2014. We had the 4 treatments I showed on the last slide, and then we have a control or a reference system, reference plots, and those are plots where we've done nothing, no removal at all, no planting. So these 4 had removal of the non-natives and then planting, and each treatment had 10 different species added to it. But they're different 10 species, different combinations. So we have 4 different combinations or 4 different teams in our system. And then we have this block here repeated 4 times for a total of 20 plots, including the controls. And we do a lot of different measurements. I'm not going to go through all of these, but basically we want to see how the forest is growing and surviving. We want to know how it's reproducing, with invasion, resistance, and management inputs. The first 5 years of data, and this is continuing, we've had high survival, which is very encouraging. And we've seen significant reductions in how much weeding we've had to do, from many hours now to just having to weed once a year and taking somewhere between 10 to 40 person hours a year to do a treatment, which is very encouraging. We also were able to reduce the nutrient levels being cycled in the litter fall. And this is really, really significant because these plots were very, very high in nutrient levels. The reference or the control still has high nutrient levels, but we reduced the nutrient levels in the cycling in the litter fall in our treated plots by 80 to 90% for nitrogen, carbon, and phosphorus. And that's super significant because it's very difficult to unenrich a forest. And we found that as we increase the canopy cover, that's also decreasing the weeds. You can see that negative relationship here. And we're getting recruitment, we're getting outplants, we're getting of the fruiting species that we outplanted are recruiting, they're fruiting, and they're making seedlings. So that's all good news. So this intentional planting is having an interesting effect. It's decreasing the nutrient input in the plots, which is increasing the outplant growth, which is making the trees bigger, making more shade, decreasing the amount of weeds, decreasing the maintenance, and that's decreasing the nutrient cycling. So we're developing a biotic resistance to invasion using this approach. Now, it's not a perfect approach. If you want to talk story sometime, we have a lot of different thoughts about the different treatments. There's no one treatment that works best, so I haven't focused on that for this talk. And there's been a lot of adaptive management that we've had to do. We've also had new pests coming in. But it's a functional trait approach is flexible, can be for different goals. So in Guam, we're going to use only native species. And the idea is doing things like selecting for fire resistance as well as invasion. So different goals than we had here. But overall, this kind of really intentional planting and using plant functional traits to choose your species, we feel has been a lasting strategy, and that's changing the plant composition in important ways. And as we go through this further, we need to ask ourselves a lot of questions about how we make these choices for restoration. There are, of course, the choices that we make of including species because they're valuable for biodiversity, but there's other reasons we might choose species. This approach is flexible. If we wanted to focus on economic value or cultural value, that could be built in the restoration goals, and using functional traits, we could choose species with those kinds of traits that are important in the system. So something to think about for scaling this up. Very happy to ask questions if there's time, and here's my contact info. And I know that Susan is here, and I think Amanda is also here. If you have questions, they might be able to also answer. Mahalo.
Thank you so much. So I think for the sake of time, we'll go ahead and take one question from the audience or online, and then Becky had provided her email address. You want to leave that up for the?
Sure. Yeah, I'll leave it. Back to that.
Questions from the audience? Oh, one question.
Thank you so much for that presentation. That was really cool, and it's really exciting to see that much success. I was curious if there's any examination of the microbial communities when looking at this strategy as well. I know some work at UH Manoa has been looking at like ridge to reef microbial communities, and especially when it comes to like fungi, I'm wondering if there is some sort of benefit.
We haven't done that, but if anyone is interested, we completely welcome it. There's open questions that could be done. And I think there'd be a lot of cool things that could be found.
Thank you so much again. We'll give her another round of applause. And so I'll introduce our next speaker. We have Serena Barassi, a graduate student from the University of California, Santa Cruz.
Hello. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Serena Barassi, and again, I'm currently a PhD student at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and I'm very excited to share my talk today titled Succession Mechanics of Native Species with Acacia in Guam. And I wanted to start my talk. Okay. Sorry. There we go. I wanted to start my talk with this photo. So this site might look familiar to a lot of people in forestry. And if you don't know, this is actually one of the sites where acacia is planted. But this was taken in 2017 when I was still in high school. And I was actually a student at Simon Sanchez. So there was like teacher here who's also from Sanchez. Unfortunately, I was not your teacher, but science had touched my heart and forestry had also at the time. Well, it's actually funny because like my friend at the time was really interested in saving the world. So he like got me and a bunch of my club mates to volunteer for tree planting because, you know, that's good for the world. Unfortunately, at the time, I was more interested in making money, but eventually I found myself in ecology and conservation and I'm here today. So shout out to forestry for getting us interested in local ecosystems. So I thought, and I really wanted to share this photo here specifically at this conference because I feel like many people in this room where I'm going with my research and my work is a lot of where I'm coming from. Okay. And so Becky kind of talked on it earlier, but I'm really interested in the concept of restoration ecology. And the most basic definition of restoration is that we have some sort of reference model ecosystem that is filled with native species, but over time, either through some sort of anthropogenic activities or through climate change, we end up going to like a degraded landscape, often called a badland. And we learn to manage that either through some sort of active restoration. We put in some native species, we replant, we restore, we get some back, some form of ecosystem function and resilience, and we end up with the native species ecosystem again. But this can be really hard when we don't have a reference model for a native ecosystem, which happens to be the case in most Pacific Island ecosystems. And so I'm also really interested in non-native species as a tool in restoration and learning how to get into a more resilient ecosystem. There's a really interesting debate right now in the literature when it comes to this because non-native species tend to often be framed as a problem. And this is often true when non-native species escalate into an invasive species. And we know that invasive species can have very terrible impacts on a lot of native systems. At the same time, there's also this other part of the debate where non-native species can also be used as a tool in restoration and often are a catalyst for more native species succession. And so in some cases, non-native species may provide essential ecosystem services and support for native species as seen in novel or hybrid ecosystems. The most important thing to remember when we're doing this is that we need to maximize the benefits while also minimizing negative impacts. And so as I mentioned earlier, sometimes non-native plantations can act as a catalyst for native species succession. And that's because these microclimatic conditions and understories, such as changes in light, temperature, or moisture, can be beneficial to seed germination. There's also some other benefits to using non-native species or having these non-native plantations, and that can be for shitting out grasses. Fire, as we know, is bad. It helps control that and also helps reduce erosion. And again, this is particularly attractive for management Pacific Islands, but I don't want to keep repeating that because I feel like a lot of people in this room know that, where human-induced fires are responsible for tropical forest destruction. And so this is really what we're doing in Southern Guam, and that's where my study system is. And currently, theory emphasizes that ecological succession may follow a facilitation or inhibition model when it comes to succession. And when I talk about succession, I'm kind of framing the Connell and Slatcher definitions of this. And Connell and Slatcher propose 3 possible models of succession that emphasize the importance of priority effects and predict how similar species composition and successional dynamics may be across similar sites. And today I'm going to talk about facilitation versus inhibition. there's a typo there. But basically, if we're seeing facilitation in the system by acacia, then that can enhance the growth and survival rates in degraded landscapes, creating a more favorable condition for native species establishment versus inhibition, where it can slow growth and challenges in the native plant establishment. So pretty straightforward. And so this is just like a very basic diagram of what we might expect. But remember, there's a lot of nuance to this system. There might be some sort of stochastic events such as disturbance that this graph is not going to represent. This is more of like the deterministic pathways that we might be seeing. And so what you're seeing right now is over time, we're increasing acacia cover and we're getting the good benefits of seeing grass decrease over time. And we're also increasing our soil nitrogen content, which is good for reducing the soil erosion and stabilizing the soil. Now we're kind of at this point where we're not really sure what's happening with native density. So we want it to increase through management, but we also want to have some sort of natural regeneration over time to reduce some labor costs. And so my research is kind of looking at, does acacia facilitate native growth or native density, or does it inhibit? And so for my research right now, I'm doing a lot of my proposal right now. So this is a lot of ongoing work and I don't have full results yet, but I'm doing a series of greenhouse experiments where I'm asking the question, what is the directionality of acacia's effects on native species growth via soil? And to answer this, we collected 3 types of soil across 3 sites in southern Guam. And the 3 soil types are acacia, bear, and grass. And these are the locations that, as you can see it, some of you might recognize these places on the map, but it's basically one in Talafofo, one in Ugum, and one in Lascado. Again, I collected the 2 types of soils at 3 sites. And basically the first experiment, or the first greenhouse experiment, is a bioassay that investigates the soil-mediated impact of native plant growth in these 3 soil types. And I just planted 5 different species in these 3 soil types and just watching the growth over time. And we have closed up that experiment. And these are the 5 native species that we planted into that bioassay. So we're using Calophyllum, Casuarina, Glaucidium, hibiscus, and Morinda. And these are just chosen based on availability and how often they've been used previously for some restoration projects. And this is some of the preliminary data that we're seeing. And so far, as we expected, species do grow better in acacia in a very controlled greenhouse experiment. And they grow really badly in bareland soil, and cut the grass is sort of like this intermediate. But at the same time, the only species that's sort of acting or behaving a little differently is Calophyllum, which is Daok. It sort of does better in bare badland versus acacia soil. But again, this is preliminary, not really finalized yet. And so I ran a very simple linear model because it had a normal distribution, and I had my site and block treatments as random effects. And I ran an interactive model based on soil type and species. And what the model predicts is that species do grow better in acacia more so than bare, and grass is still like an intermediate there. And so I did another experiment, which is a soil conditioning experiment. And at 5 different sites, I collected only badland soil. So I kind of overlapped those 2 a little bit. And I had that badland soil separated into 2 treatments. So the first treatment is just bare badland soil by itself. And then the second treatment is acacia conditioned soil. So I basically planted acacia into bare soil, and I'm letting that condition for a couple months, and soon we'll plant another 5 native species. And we're not in the second phase of that experiment yet, but we're eventually going to also measure the growth and survival of those species. And to complement this greenhouse experiment, we're also running a field experiment because, as we know, species tend to react very differently in a field experiment versus a very highly controlled greenhouse experiment. And there might be other natural conditions that we need to look out for as well. And so right now, I'm just doing a pilot experiment, but there are 2 field sites that have 3 triplets each, so a total of 6. And the idea is that I have 3 treatments for the different types of acacia sites that are planted. So I have 1 microsite where it's an acacia, and I planted 4 native species at that microsite. And I have a second microsite where we removed an acacia, and we have a 3rd unplanted site where we just plant native species by itself. And the idea is to compare whether the acacia or whether the native species are growing better with the removed acacia or if it does really well with the acacia already planted into the ground. So if we do expect that the native species grow really well with acacia already planted in the ground, then it would be okay to just keep adding the species. And they are benefiting a lot from the soil and acacia as like some sort of shade effect. But if it grows better with the removed acacia, then it might be better to at some point remove an acacia as we continue to plant native species. So the goal of my project is to really just supplement what's already being done in management and kind of guide questions like, is acacia removal really necessary? And if you don't need it, then don't do it. Or at what size of acacia is the ideal time to add a native? Should we add it when it's already grown or when it's recently removed or wait a bit more? Or is it bad to add a native when acacia is already an adult? And yeah, that's basically what I'm doing so far, waiting on a lot of those results. And I'd like to acknowledge a lot of my collaborators. Shout out to Forestry. Thank you to Cecilia. I don't think she's in the room, but she's the person who kept the native species alive. And also all of the people at Doe Ag Forestry for all of the help over the summer of like helping me put up the cages and the plants and everything else, and everybody else who was involved. And shout out to my dad's truck for all of that. And also to Navigating Home, which actually allowed me to be an intern for a short time at Doe Ag Forestry and got me involved with that. Thank you.
Questions for Serena? One question in the back, and then for the sake of time, we'll go ahead and move on. But we have one question.
Hi, I work with a group of volunteers to clear acres of land and plant natives. And we're working in an area now that's predominantly Tangantangan, which is an acacia relative. We originally lopped them to the ground, but they resprout way too often. So we're pulling them out by the roots. Our soil depth is about 6 inches, sometimes 12 inches. Can't really leave them because their seeds are too prolific, and you know they're going to crowd out the natives that we plant. So what do you think? Is our soil better? We're actually chipping the Tangantangan, and when it dries out, and you know, using that to mulch our natives. So
I don't study Tongan, but I do know
They're
that the soil
relative.
chemistry does change with Tongan, and there's this additional add of nitrogen. So it probably is like more difficult to remove species.
yeah. Well, anyway, I was just hopeful that our soil is more, you know, since it's an acacia relative, you know,
Yeah.
that it would be more advantageous.
Thank you. Thank you again, Serena. Our next speaker, we have Adrienne Lorzell from NAFAC Marianas. Give her a round of applause.
Buenas and half a day. Good afternoon, everybody. I think I'm the last one before the break, so I'll try to make it quick. CJ, do you have like time cards just to keep me on track? Somebody? Okay, perfect. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Adrienne Lorzell. I am managing the Forest Enhancement Project for NAVFAC at Marine Corps Base Camp Bloss. It's quite a large project that we're doing 1,000 acres of enhancement. And just to kind of explain a little bit of our wording choice, for the military and DoD, restoration really is more about like CERCLA, RCRA, kind of toxic sites, cleaning up old bombs. So restoration has kind of a different connotation for the bureaucracy that I live in. So they came up with this term enhancement, which in some ways I think actually also makes sense because I'm not really sure that anybody has ever settled on what we're restoring to. And so we've kind of arrived at this term as a way to try to capture what we're doing and not sort of create confusion in our world with different names. Just to, uh-oh, it's my CJ, it doesn't want to advance. Film at the I break things, so I apologize in advance. Just as a quick background, so we have about 1,800 acres of area with varying levels of intervention. The majority of it is actually driven by U.S. Fish and Wildlife biological opinion for the relocation of the Marine Corps from Okinawa to Guam, and it was basically a one-to-one enhancement project. So for every acre disturbed by the buildup, there's an acre of pretty significant intervention. And then in addition to the 1,000 acres of enhancement, we also have other different sites that have varying levels, ungulate control, outplanting, some endangered species, translocations and movement, and also the land that we inherited from the other installations, former Navy and Air Force properties, has existing commitments for natural resource management, which we've kind of picked up and tried to advance because of different challenges in resourcing weren't necessarily where they might have been years ago. One of them you might be familiar with, Hoputo Ecological Reserve, is actually an old mitigation site, I believe from the 80s or early 90s. And we're trying to do some more active management in that space just based on things that have happened over the years. So total of about 1,800 acres, and it's to support the relocation and some of the training activities, not just for the actual construction, but moving forward as those spaces become operational. Just to Did I break it again? Just to give you an idea of where the locations are. So the Mason Live Fire Training Range Complex, which is a big ungulate control site, is about 600 acres, about 400-ish acres of pretty decent habitat. That's at the very north tip, right above the National Fish and Wildlife Refuge up there. Kaigwat is our biggest forest enhancement site. It's 2 phases, one about 260 acres, one about 417. And then we have Hoputo, which is that kind of coralish colored area on the west coast of the installation. And Tagwak is our other forest enhancement site, which is around about 400 acres total. And now it doesn't want to advance. You can just stare at the lovely map that our fantastic team provides because I am useless with maps. Okay, so just some of the different interventions that we've started, and this is a long-term project. The biological opinion actually calls for 30 years worth of funded commitments to do this work. So we're actually in quite early stages of this. And it sounds super simple on paper, right? We're gonna put up some fences, we're gonna get rid of all the ungulates that shouldn't have been there to begin with. We're gonna put in some of the species we want, including a lot of endangered, federally listed endangered and threatened species. And then we'll do invasive plant control and just kind of ongoing management. And it's a super small number of bullets that turns out to be really ridiculously difficult to achieve in practice. But we are actually just 5 years in seeing some results. And I love this photo because I'm really proud of the teams that we have going out into the field. This is actually a baby Tuberlabium guamense orchid, and it looks to me like a small green slug, and it's a tiny, tiny thing, like, I don't know, maybe half a centimeter. It's not a big plant. But we were trying to make sure we were not affecting any listed species when we were doing work in the forest. And this is like the level of detail that these guys go out and are making sure to check really carefully when we're doing work. So there was 3 of these really ridiculously small orchids. We had the last surveys, I believe, about 14,000 Tuberlabium in this forest space, mostly on invasive vitex. After the typhoon, we were kind of concerned we would have lost a lot of them, but turns out that they are still there and also still actively reproducing. So we're seeing a lot of recruitment of these species as well. This one is from Mason Live Fire Training Range Complex, former Northwest Field. And I'm super excited about this because the cycads, if any of you know, were once the most common forest tree on island, but have since become actually threatened because of a number of invasive insects that have been introduced. Primarily the cycad scale, but also there's a butterfly that really causes a lot of damage. And one of the things was we weren't seeing a lot of reproduction. The trees are so like sapped of energy by these invasive pests that the quality of the seeds, the pollen, before you get to seed stage, a lot of changes and a lot of problems actually recruiting. Would just from, at this point, was not full eradication of pigs and deer from this site, but a pretty good knockdown of numbers. Our ungulate teams were seeing a lot of recruitment and actually seeing cycad seeds for the first time sprouting, germinating, being able to actually exist in the world. Whereas prior to this, we would see very, very few recruits, only in some really deep karst pockets where the pigs and the deer had a lot of trouble getting into those areas to eat them. This is one tree and probably one cycle of seeds that, you know, a huge number of them sprouted, which is this amazing to me. And also, again, props to our field teams that I don't get outside nearly as much as I should. And so they send me all these photos and keep me updated. And it's nice to be able to document what's happening and to see some positive change. And just to give you sort of, that was one site, and Northwest Field is in much better shape than most of the forests we work in. This is actually at Kaigwat Forest Enhancement, which has a really long history of pretty intense disturbance. It's been graded a couple times. There's old roads, there was old buildings, there was, you know, pipelines, dump sites, who knows what's going on in there. And even in that space where we know we have a lot of things to contend with, substantially more work to do than up in Northwest Field, we were seeing cycad sprouts. And again, this is one of the teams doing ungulate control for us. I think this was actually one of the dog handlers who really had no business like stopping to take pictures for me, but did this. And so I'm really eternally grateful that they both noticed so that they're not stepping on the baby cycads, but also took the time to send me the points and the pictures so I know what's happening. We have also done some targeted outplantings, and it's a little hard to see on this picture, but there's a couple things going on that I want to point out. So after Typhoon Mawar in 2023, we had a sort of complete loss of our nursery. We were fortunately sort of between planting cycles, so we didn't have as many plants as we normally would have in that space, but we still definitely had a lot of plants to deal with. And for this site, we ended up taking some of the post plants for the endangered Mariana's 8-spot butterfly. And because we just didn't have any place to keep them or a way to manage them in the nursery after this devastation from the typhoon, we just threw them all in the forest, kind of hope for the best. If they died, they died, but at least we tried to get them out, give them a half a chance. So this is Maria Lynn, another one of our rock star natural resource specialists. And she is putting Elitostoma and Procris out on a little limestone pinnacle in Kaigwat Forest Enhancement north. And so this is the little Elitostoma that we put out. But also, just to give you an idea, this is almost 4 months to the day after the typhoon. The regular existing forest was still really struggling. This was a little mapunya tree that had gotten knocked over and is really trying to come back, not doing very well. But also, again, just the removal of ungulates. This whole kind of mess here above the circle is an old cycad stump that you would have thought was completely gone. It's rotted, it's like down to fiber, it's crumbly, it's a mess. But there was just enough live tissue in that rotted stump that this thing was trying to come back. So this is the sort of thing that we have been able to see. Just removing that one stressor of these ungulates has had a huge impact on not just our ability to outplant in these areas, but also the native regeneration and native recruitment in those spaces to be able to get these trees back and to restore something of a system closer to what it would have been prior to all the invasives. So good news for those host plants. We had not documented any host plants in the forest enhancement prior to us putting them there. We knew that they probably were there at some point, just on the edges on the western boundary, but outside the forest, there was host plants. And I think, Christiana, during a survey, you saw one adult butterfly right at the edge, but we had never seen any host plants or butterflies in this forest. About 8-9 months after we put those host plants out, we had Mariana's 8-spot recruiting. And so they have come back in the area. One of the things we have learned, right, it's ecological whack-a-mole. We got rid of one problem. The deer and the pigs love these plants because they're sort of juicy and have a lot of water, particularly in the dry season. It's a preferred food source. The slugs, Cuban slugs wiped out 100% of the Elitostoma in the first week after we put them out into the forest. The Procris is doing a little bit better, and we've started doing some targeted slug control. Turns out even for over-the-counter, just buy it in the hardware store, slug bait, you have to have like pesticide certification and report the pesticide use and all of the good things in the DoD system. So we're getting that in-house capability so we can respond more quickly to be able to control some of these pests as we notice them. But in the meantime, we are seeing the butterflies come back, which is really exciting because they were not there before. Other things that we've seen, pigs often eat young coconut crabs. So after, hours and hours in the forest, we didn't really see very many coconut crabs. We have been seeing a lot more of them, and it's not something that's targeted, but it's just, as we're out and about, we definitely are seeing more crabs of all sizes out there that we had not seen before. This is probably not so exciting to the plant people here. This is a really should be common understory. It's a little Guam Marianas endemic, but we only found them in karst areas because they were just getting hammered by all the things eating them. And now this is like an old roadbed, and they're recruiting and taking space, which previously was occupied by kind of dirt and leaf litter and noxious invasives that things didn't want to eat. You can also see, again, ecological whack-a-mole. There's tongan in this picture, which is also something we didn't see in the forest, but now it's back because nobody's eating it. Same thing with grasses, which also produces a fire hazard. And then also vines. So weeds are definitely the big winners when we move the ungulates, but it's something that, we keep figuring out how to tackle and what's the next step here. Just more pictures post-typhoon, particularly the vines have gone crazy. And then just to show this is an impact not just on the forest structure itself, but also for some of the endangered species we're concerned about. This is actually a picture from Tinian, but just to give you scale, that's an old cycad with a trunk of about 1 foot in diameter, and it was completely engulfed by Antigona and the chain of love vine. And so this is DLNR head from Tinian. Mr. Ray just wanted to show us this old tree. And his family occasionally will go out to the property and clear off this cycad to try to keep it from being completely lost to this vine. But definitely something that, we see also on Guam with the invasives. Just a picture of the cycad scale, cycad butterfly. Again, one of the things that we have to kind of try to address as we figure out one threat, then other ones sort of take prominence as a bigger issue. So I guess job security, there's not really a whole lot to say, but we're constantly trying to figure out what's the next thing that's going to be our biggest issue to try to tackle. Just some quick overview of different projects we have ongoing, primarily maintaining the fences, keeping the ungulate eradication intact, doing invasive outplanting, invasive removals and native outplantings. Big vitex removal is coming up, so that's going to be a huge thing to look at in Kaigwad and how the forest responds to that. But just, kind of an idea of the scale and the volume of things we've got going on to try to keep this moving forward and to keep seeing these positive results. And other than that, I am okay for questions if we have time.
We'll take one question from the front.
Thanks. Thanks, Adrian. It was cool to hear the different instances of things coming back. And I thought it was interesting about the struggles with the invasive like vines and weeds and things like that. And I'm sure that there are maybe some other enhancement sites that maybe didn't have that extensive disturbance history. And I'm wondering if it's just a lot easier if you control ungulates, in more like pristine kind of native limestone forest that still has that structure, do you deal less with those problems? And maybe is it a good strategy to focus more on the places that have less disturbance history for restoration?
I mean, I think it kind of goes without saying that it's always easier when you start with less problems, but we are seeing significant vine issues even in former Northwest Field Mason live fire. So it just, and things like typhoons, right, can totally tip the balance where it was not an issue before, but you get a big canopy gap and it suddenly becomes a huge issue. So it's always easier when you start with a more intact system, and also there's less invasive seed bank, but for sure it's going to be an issue kind of wherever, I think. And I don't know that we have really any good pristine forests. We have bad and less bad, maybe.
Thank you so much, Adrian. Adrian, come stand in the middle because you're hiding behind those two things. So if you have further questions, please, this is what Adrian looks like. So ask her any questions you have. I think right now we have we're going to take a 5-minute wellness break. Oh,
can I have one more question, please?
Quick question. Let's go.
Adrian, I saw all the cycads sprouting in one spot. The seeds were all kind of sprouting in one area. Will you be rearranging those seedlings, or do they just stay in place as is?
So we have kind of a program to move seeds around for other reasons, right? Like we have commitments for the biological opinion and for certain things that we have to meet certain numbers. And so for those, we will take a limited number of those seeds, but we do have a pretty strict control and we actually keep tabs on how many are moved. So we leave the majority, I don't remember if we're at 75 or 80% in the places where they fall, just because given the problem with scale and butterfly and borers and all the other things, we want to make sure that there's enough left there so that you have some ability for something to survive to adulthood. Because I mean, it's super exciting, right? Like I open these photos in meetings often and I'm like squealing like a toddler with a cupcake. But it's definitely not the end for those. Like we're not sure they're actually going to make it because of the pests.
Thank you all. So again, we have a 5-minute break. Go and use the restrooms and do what you need to do. And then we'll come back to finish off the rest of our plant ecology and conservation session. Hey everyone. Okay, looks like everyone's having great conversation. You got some snacks. Let's start to make our way over to our seats so we can get going. No.
Okay. Okay. Half a day, everybody. Let's start making our way back to our seats. I just have a quick announcement about an opportunity on Thursday morning. So if you don't go too hard at the trivia on Wednesday night, then potentially you could join me for a sunrise hike on Thursday morning. We're gonna go to Maga Agua Falls. So that's Nimitz Hill. There's limited parking, but I have space for 4 people in my car and maybe we can carpool. And it's really beautiful hike, great place for sunrise. I will try and get gloves for everybody so that we protect our hands from the sword grass. And yeah, we will make it to the conference on time. It's not a long hike. Oh, so 5 a.m.
Thank you, Kayla. If you have further questions about the hike, go ahead and see Kayla. So let's start making our way back to the table. We're gonna go ahead and move on to our next speaker. We have Ellie Rourke from the University of Washington. Let's give her a big round of applause.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay. Uh-oh. Sorry. Can't go back to the first slide. Okay. Well, you all saw it for a while. It's a Tinian forest restoration. So that's what I'm here to talk about. I know many of you, I've been in the CNMI for a while and I was working for the CNMI Division of Fish and Wildlife, but this is me coming to you in a new role. So I'm putting on a new hat today to talk about forest restoration. And this is work that I'm presenting on behalf of my co-authors. My new position is as a research project manager for the University of Washington. And we've got this lovely team, which was on the previous slide, Dr. John Bacher, Fletcher Moore, and Jill Liskey-Clark from University of Washington and NAVFAC Marianas. So today I want to touch on how Tinian's landscape has changed over time, which you heard a little bit about from Kaylee this morning, and what our goals are in restoring it. Then I'll outline how we're planning to approach the restoration and what we've done so far. But most importantly, as you listen to this today, please keep in mind that one of our goals in presenting this work at such an early stage is to get feedback about our approach. So at the end of the presentation and on some of the slides throughout, you're going to see a little QR code like the one here, and it'll take you to a quick survey where you can provide feedback to us about our ideas and our plans. So please feel free to scan it and send us your thoughts at any time during the presentation and after the presentation's over. So the story of Tinian's landscape is really one of change and transformation. There's evidence that humans have occupied Tinian for several thousand years, and landscape transformation has been happening throughout that time. However, the 20th century hit Tinian pretty hard. Apologies for the low resolution map image here, but I wanted to show you this illustration of the extent of sugarcane development on Tinian in the early 20th century. So as Kaylee mentioned, over 88% of the island was cleared for sugarcane. And this was a major transformation, obviously. And then, of course, in the mid 20th century, the war hit and Tinian was again transformed. So after Americans took the island, military installations were constructed, not just in the Northfield area where we kind of classically think of the Tinian military presence, but also including the Masalic bomb dump area, which is what's pictured here. And this actually overlaps our restoration site. Okay, so this is a map of our 2 restoration sites. This is just east of the main Tinian airport and south of Donkalo Beach, on the southeastern tip of the military lease. Its position on the central east coast of the island. We have 2 20-acre sites picked out here in the black boxes. The Pina Plateau site, which is almost entirely grassland, and then a Tongan site, which is, of course, mostly Tongan. The dots shown here are places where Fletcher Moore and the UW team have done baseline vegetation surveys. And there's actually a bunch of native limestone forest in this area, including, at the areas where you see the red dots that are here. So when we talk about forest restoration in this context, we're really not trying to harken back to yesteryear or some, previously established baseline on Tinian. We are mostly concerned with restoring particular aspects of ecosystem functionality. Primarily, our goals are centered around how the forest functions for wildlife, specifically for the 3 species that you see here, but mostly for Tinian monarch and Finihi or Mariana fruit bat, and kind of secondarily for Micronesian megapode, which is not detected very often on Tinian, but which we would love to see come back to Tinian in more full force. We are also interested in increasing carbon sequestration at our restoration sites. So here's an image of the existing limestone forest that is just adjacent to our restoration sites. And this is roughly what we're aiming for in terms of forest structure and species composition. This is a summary table of just some of the data that we collected during our initial vegetation surveys of the area. And what it shows us is that the native limestone forest has more trees per plot, higher tree density, more species per plot, higher species diversity, and a lower proportion of the tree species that are present are Tongan. So the question is, how do we move our restoration sites from the baselines that you see here to something that more closely resembles the native forest? So I'm now going to talk you through the model that we're planning to use to approach the restoration. So we plan to tackle it in multiple scales, in multiple stages at multiple scales. So our first step is stage 1, which is this array of small plots that you see here. We'll test out different plot treatments to determine what works best for establishing the plant community that we want. And then we're going to establish or evaluate the success of those treatments and choose 2 to 3 treatments to kind of scale up to larger plots within the restoration site. You can see that in the stage 2 boxes here. And then in stage 3, we choose the highest performing treatments and scale them up to the full site. So the largest box here would represent a full restoration site. And you could see kind of how that progression will evolve. Before I get into the details of our proposed treatments, I want to mention that we have a specific challenge because our work is taking place on the Tinian military lease area, which is that we cannot actually break ground in order to plant anything. So there'll be no tilling or digging holes in the restoration site because of the risk of unexploded ordnance and the cost of cleaning up unexploded ordnance from those sites. So one thing we're looking for input about is your best ideas for clearing and establishing vegetation without ground disturbance or digging. Okay, so obviously we have 2 very different restoration sites in terms of their current composition, the grassland versus the Tongan, and they're going to require different approaches, but I'm going to walk you through some of the treatment options that we're considering for our plots. and then show you what that might look like in terms of how the stage 1 experimental array gets laid out on the ground. So the first thing we're concerned with is control of existing vegetation. We plan to test a couple of different approaches on our experimental plots. Partial control, total elimination of invasive vegetation, and no control, just planting around the existing vegetation. To establish our desired species, we plan to try mound planting, direct seeding, and different combinations of species. For example, we might plant some plots with only early successional species, some with late successional species, some with a combination, etc. And we are also interested in treatments that will both attract natural dispersal and assist in allowing plants to successfully establish. So, for example, adding artificial perches for birds to our Pina Plateau grassland sites, or fencing out ungulates. We're also discussing how we might manage for rat predation of seeds and seedlings. All right, so here's an example of what this might look like in terms of how our plots actually get laid out on the ground. This would be an example stage 1 array at the Pina Plateau site in the grassland. And we could basically have a 8 treatment plots, or 8 treatment plots within a box here. And half would be fenced for ungulate control and half unfenced. And then within each of those halves, we would have 4 5x5 meter treatments. We have not finalized these exact measurements yet, but this is just a proposal of what this might look like and what we're considering. In each treatment, we would try a different combination of the treatment options that I was just outlining. So for example, dark squares here would be mowed, while lighter squares would be mowed and then have herbicide applied in order to manage existing vegetation. And all the boxes in this scenario might have a mix of early and late successional species plants planted. As I said, we're really in the process of trying to determine what exactly our treatment plan will look like. So that question mark there is to indicate that we're really open to your suggestions about specific treatments. If you have things that have really worked for you, please let us know if you have ideas you don't see here. And here's a look at what the Tongan site experimental plots might look like. We do plan to treat the understory herbaceous layer of vegetation across the whole plot. We have terrible Ravina humilis problems in our plot. But then for half a plot, we will leave the full canopy intact and plant under it. And for half a plot, we would maybe leave only a partial canopy and experiment with different combinations of desired species. Again, we're open to feedback and suggestions here. I also want to point out that in the original schematic that I showed, the experimental plots were all kind of clustered into the upper left-hand corner there. But we're actually thinking that a nucleation approach or a more dispersed approach might work better. So the stage 1 experimental plots would take up the orange box spots that you see here. And then we would scale up to stage 2 in the blue and stage 3 in white, with the most successful treatments, again, building out from the hubs of our experimental plots. So where we are right now, we've not yet begun planting at the sites. Right now, we're at the stage of experimental design, trying to finish a site plan for our 2 sites and really finalize what those treatments are going to be for our initial plots. But we have established a subcontract with the Tinian Mayor's Office and Tinian DLNR to use and expand their existing nursery to grow plants for this project. We're in the process of hiring a nursery manager who will be working on propagating target species for the project. And we're also working on, we've completed baseline vegetation surveys for both restoration sites, and we're in the process of working on baseline wildlife surveys for both sites. So as I've said, we would love your feedback. Please feel free to email either me or John Scan the QR code, leave some comments in the quick survey we've set up. You can also come chat with me anytime this week. I will be here until Friday. And of course, we cannot do this without all of our partners who are not appearing on the screen right now. I had a final slide with all of their beautiful names. Many of them are in this room. And I want to especially shout out our temporary staff and interns who have collected a lot of data for us. There they are. So many of them. Anyway, thank you all very much. If we have time for questions, I'm happy to take them.
I think we'll go ahead and take one question from the audience. Oh, there's one on Zoom. Okay. We'll take the question for Zoom.
From Muñeca Flores, why isn't there a widespread removal of unexploded ordnance?
Oh, a number of reasons that I am probably not the most qualified person to talk about because I don't work for the DoD, so I do not understand all of the reasons. But my sense is that the expense of removing unexploded ordnance is immense, the kind of expertise that it takes to bring out into the field, and not necessarily worth it in terms of the cost benefit analysis for this particular project at this particular scale. Also, I'm 90% sure they would have to like raise the entire area to the ground to clear all the UXOs. So that would undermine some of our plans for how we're approaching the restoration. But on the other hand, we could dig, so who knows?
Ellie?
Yes, hey Ken.
Hey, great talk. What ungulates are you dealing with? I mean, it's very different than what we find here on Guam.
Very different, and we're trying to figure out whether it's worth it to fence for ungulates or not, basically, especially because of how difficult it would be to put up fencing, given the fact that we can't necessarily dig fence posts into the ground. But cows, primarily. It's pretty much cows. People send their cattle to graze in the grassland area a fair bit.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Serna. I see your hand. I'm gonna ask that you go ahead and take up Ellie's offer and talk to her while she's here all week. Thank you. Thank you again, Ellie. So the next speaker we have today is Jessie Yang from the University of Guam.
Yang, and today we'll be Hello everyone. My name is Michael Fernandez, and I'm joined by my colleague Jessie Yang. And today we'll be presenting our research entitled Application of a PCR Method for Sex Determination of Cycas micronesica.
Start with some background information about cycads. Cycads are a diverse group of plants with many different species. They belong to the order Cycadale, which includes 3 families, Cycadaceae, Zamiaceae, and Strigeraceae, with around 350 species in total. In this study, we will be focusing on Cycas micronesica, a species found in Micronesia that belongs to the family Cycadaceae and the genus Cycas. Cycas micronesica, known as Fadang in Guam, is a dioecious cycas species native to Micronesia, meaning individual plants are either male or female. It is also arborescent, meaning growing in tree-like form, and plays a crucial role in the island's ecosystem. Historically, C. micronegica was recorded as the most abundant tree species on Guam. Cycas micronegica is found across several Pacific islands, including Guam, Yap, Palau, Pohnpei, and the Northern Mariana Islands. Its widespread distribution speaks to its adaptability and ecological importance in the region. Each of these islands provide a unique environment, shaping the way this species thrive across different landscapes. As previously mentioned, Cycas micronegica is dioecious, meaning individual plants are either male or female, requiring both for reproduction. Determining their sex is relatively straightforward. Female plants produce seeds while male plants develop combs. This distinct reproductive structure provides a clear method for identification once the plants reach maturity.
Now, despite being a major keystone species for forests across Micronesia, C. micronesical populations are currently undergoing rapid decline. And the primary driver for this decline is the invasive cycad scale, Olacaspis yasumatsui. Cycad scale was first introduced in Guam in 2003, and since then, it's decimated trees across the entire island. In the most recent forest inventory in 2013, over 93% of plants on the island showed signs of scale damage. And since then, C. micronesica has been listed as threatened under the U.S. Endangered Species Act, and more recently as endangered by the IUCN Red List. However, numerous efforts are being done to support the recovery of C. micronesica, aimed at pest management strategies and the outplanting of nursery propagated individuals on Guam and other islands. While these efforts offer hope for restoring cycad populations, continued action is necessary in ensuring the long-term survival of the species. Now, one of the biggest challenges in restoring C. micronesica comes down again to the basic biology of cycads. When we outplant seedlings, we have no way of knowing if they're male or female until they reach reproductive maturity. And for C. micronesica, that timeline is uncertain. It could take many years before we could see those telltale male cones or female seeds. And this makes restoration efforts even more difficult because a balanced population structure is ultimately important for ensuring reproduction and long-term survival. To overcome this, we need to come up with a fast and reliable method for determining sex. This brings me to a key study done by Liu et al. In 2022, where they used genome-wide association study to identify a male-specific genetic marker for sexing Cycas pansihuanensis, which is a distantly related cycad from China. From their research, they developed two genetic markers. One, a control marker that amplifies an autosomal gene in both male and females. And two, a male-specific marker that amplifies a male-specific gene for floral development on the Y chromosome that is highly expressed in males. So to test the compatibility of these primers on our cycad species, we tested them on known male and female individuals of C. micronesica from Guam and found a sexing accuracy of 86%. Now, looking closely at this electrophoresis gel, you can see clear and consistent amplification of the autosomal gene across all samples at around 275 base pairs, or that lower band, confirming that it works well as a control. On the other hand, we get inconsistent amplification of the male-specific MADS-Y gene across samples at around 681 base pairs. Now, while these results are promising, the variability in the male-specific markers suggests that there's room for improvement. PCR amplification can usually fail across evolutionarily distant species, especially when the primer binding region's evolutionary history is unknown. So while Liu et al.'s primers worked consistently across C. pansihuanensis and other closely related cycad species, as you can see in this phylogeny, their specificity may have So in order to design an ideal primer for PCR, your primer should bind neatly to the target region of whatever gene that you're working on or whatever species that you're testing. And this just ensures that the Taq polymerase can accurately recognize the binding site and initiate DNA amplification in PCR. But if there are base pair mismatches in that primer binding site, we can see binding efficiency becoming compromised, as you can see here. And amplification can fail under these conditions, which is what we suspected when we tested Liu et al.'s primers on our C. micronesica from Guam. So to overcome this issue of specificity, we went back to the drawing board and redesigned the primers to be more specific to our CICAS micronesica. To do this, we sequenced all of those successfully amplified male-specific amplicons using Liu et al.'s primers. And using those male amplicon sequences, we designed a potential primer that would bind more specifically to our C. micronesica, eventually coming up with a redesigned forward and reverse male-specific primer set, or MICC MADS-Y.
To test our new primers, we collect leaf sample from CICAS micronesica. We gather 332 juvenile samples from the nursery and 127 mature samples from the various field sites. Out of 127 mature samples, 69 were collected from Site A, 42 from Site B, and 16 from Site C. After collecting the leaf samples, we extracted the total genomic DNA from each one. Next, we performed a multiplex PCR to amplify both autosomal and the male-specific genes. This allows us to target genes that are present in both sexes, as well as genes specific to the male plants. To verify the success of amplification, we ran the sample through gel electrophoresis. These steps help us confirm that the right gene were amplified and gave us a clear picture of the genetic materials we were working with. So for our PCR, we used two different set of primers. One target a 275 base pair region of autosomal DNA, which we use to amplify genes that are present in both male and female CICAT. The other primer set was for a male-specific gene, which amplified a 196 base pair region. This allows us to specifically identify male plants. Here's one of our gel results. The upper band, which is about 275 base pair, represents the autosomal gene. We use this as a control to make sure that the CICAT DNA is present in our sample. The lower bands, around 196 base pair, is from the primer we designed specifically for the male gene. If the male gene is present, it shows up as a band in this lower position, meaning the CICAT is male. If the band isn't there, it indicates that the plant is female. This method helps us easily distinguish between male and female CICATs based on their genetic markers. So here's what we found from our PCR result. We have a total of 332 juvenile samples from the nursery. And after testing, 163 came out as male and 169 as female. For the mature sample we collected from the field, we had 127 in total. All of those, 69 were male and 58 were female. For this project, we are mainly focusing on identifying the sex of CICAT were previously unknown. Along the way, we have noticed some characteristics that help us confirm the PCR method we developed was correctly designed. The results from the PCR test match up with what we observed phenotypically. Males have cones and females have seeds. We PCR sexed 23 individuals from fields and 4 from the nursery. And in every case, the PCR result aligned with the physical trait we observed. This confirmed that the PCR method we have designed is working as expected and accurately identify the sex of the plants. Now, moving on to the sex ratio. As you can see from this table, all of our samples show a roughly 1-to-1 male and female ratio. However, at site C, there seems to be a slightly bias toward males, but this is likely due to the small sample size from the site. With longer sample, we'll expect the ratio to balance out. Overall, the data shows a fairly even sex ratio across the sites, with just a minor exception at site C.
One of the biggest challenges in cycad conservation is ensuring balanced populations for long-term survival. With this reliable PCR-based method for sexing, we can take a more strategic approach to restoration efforts. First, this allows us to assess reproductive viability and refine population management strategies, ensuring effective conservation efforts. Second, with sex-determined seedlings, we can target outplanting efforts to maintain a well-balanced population structure. And finally, by ensuring a healthy male to female ratio, we can enhance pollination success and increase seed production, supporting the sustainability of cycad populations. So we present this PCR-based sexing approach as a practical and effective tool for strengthening cycad conservation across Guam and Micronesia. And finally, we'd like to acknowledge our funding sources: NAVFAC Joint Region Marianas, USDA NIFA RIIA, USDA NIFA AgPI, and we'd like to extend our gratitude to numerous research associates, Jacob San Nicolas, Rowena Mendy, and Ron Manzano, and other members of the Guam Plant Extinction Prevention Program and the University of Guam Horticulture Lab. Thank you.
We do have the two presenters online with us on Zoom, so we can go ahead and take one or two questions.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Yes. I am wondering if you have any, if you know if there's any differences in like seedling survival or adult survival by sex now that you know how to sex them.
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
I was wondering if there's any differences in seedling survival between male seedlings and female seedlings, or germination rates or anything like that.
I think Michael?
That's something that we actually didn't look at. Our at least core of the lab was to focus on like the genetic aspect of this whole thing. But I'm pretty sure once we start last that I left Guam, they were just starting to implement this PCR method for sexing their seedlings back at the nursery. So I think that's a further step that you know, we can look at, like whether or not you know, after determining whether or not these seedlings are male or female, how does that not knowing sex, like how can we see that? Is there any difference, like you say, in like seedling survival rate?
Well, I should have started with that was a really great talk, and it's really a cool tool that you've developed. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no worries. Sorry, I should also preface that this is like work that we did last year, and since then I've moved on from the University of Guam. I'm currently here in Hawaii. So aloha, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you for taking the time out to present on that. Let's give them another round of applause. Thank you, guys. So we have our next presenter is Abby Frazier from Clark University and the University of Hawaii at Manoa.
Half a day, everyone. Thanks so much for sticking around through the afternoon. And I am excited to share with you one of my projects once we get these slides going. Almost. So I am a climatologist and a geography professor at Clark University. and as well as an affiliate faculty member at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, which is where I did my PhD. I was also the chapter lead for the 5th U.S. National Climate Assessment Hawaii and Pacific Islands chapter that was released in November 2023. And I've got at least one slide that links to that report. But for today, I am focusing on drought. So this is last week's U.S. Drought Monitor status map for the U.S. affiliated Pacific Islands. And if you are not familiar with the U.S. Drought Monitor, this is an excellent resource for up-to-date real-time drought information. They update these maps every single week and present very clear drought categories. So we can see Guam is in the yellow D0 category right now, which means abnormally dry, while Saipan is in the D2 severe drought category. These maps also come with really nice text summaries, and I think the US API maps have some of the best text summaries. So check this out if you don't already bookmark this and look at it regularly. So this is kind of a snapshot of what's happening right now with drought, but one of the things I look at as a climatologist is how drought is changing. And some of the work I've done in Hawaii has found that over the last century, we've seen droughts getting worse. We're seeing droughts lasting longer, they are getting more severe, and there is some evidence that droughts are also worsening in other Pacific islands as well. Drought is a natural phenomenon in the islands, but we know that it has severe impacts across multiple sectors, right? It affects drinking water, it affects agriculture, cultural practices, ecosystems, etc. So some of the work that I've done has actually looked at how drought links with wildfire. And this is my one slide I snuck in from the National Climate Assessment. This is a graph showing wildfire percent area burned for 7 Pacific Islands compared to the mainland US, specifically the Western US states. And we know that with increasingly severe droughts and warming, this is increasing fire risk. So you can see as a percent of land area, how much of the islands burn. And this is from a new paper by Clay Trauernicht et al. That came out in 2024. And we know management plays a huge role in in determining the future of fire, but drought is also an important component here. So in 2019, when I was working for the Forest Service, we published a report to look at how people are actually dealing with drought on the ground. What actions are resource managers taking to prepare for a drought before it happens? And how are they dealing with the drought when it's happening and then facilitating recovery afterwards? So in the report, we looked at these management actions under water resources, agriculture, wildfire prevention, and endangered species. And this was a great start to categorizing these different drought management actions. However, it actually led us to a whole bunch more questions about how people are dealing with drought. So when it comes to drought decision-making, what data resources are being used? How are people getting information? Are they using the drought monitor or do they have other sources? What types of decisions are being made when it comes to drought? Is drought considered in planning of new activities, right? Do islands and agencies have drought plans in place so they know what to do when a drought happens? And what kinds of products are useful for different sectors? So we found that a knowledge exchange process was needed. Resource managers want to be more actively involved in research, and they often, though, are just so stretched thin that there's not enough time or training to access the information they need. And there's really not a centralized data clearinghouse. The information is not just in one place. So we need more formal communication mechanisms to get people talking, and people need better access to comprehensive information and technical assistance. And we know that a model exists for this for wildfire through the Pacific Fire Exchange, which Christine has already mentioned. So using that as our model, in 2019, we started the Pacific Drought Knowledge Exchange, or PDKE. And if you like our logo, there's some free stickers and magnets in the back. So we started our Pacific Drought Knowledge Exchange, and as it is today, the PDKE, our mission is to facilitate drought knowledge exchange and enable these collaborative relationships among researchers and managers to expand the utility of drought information. So we use an iterative co-production approach with all of our partners, and we produce lots of drought-related information, trainings, and tools. And right now, this is our core stewardship team. The 7 of us meet every single week. And you can see we are spread across many different institutions. So this weekly team, we call it our stewardship team. We meet weekly, we oversee all these day-to-day activities, we do a ton of outreach and coordinate with partners, and we write the grants and papers. We also have a quarterly team called our steering committee. And so we check in with these guys every couple of months, and they help provide guidance and input on what we're doing. And then we have, for folks who just want to see us once a year, our advisory council. So they join us at the annual meeting and help us really brainstorm future activities and help guide where we're going. So PDKE started with pilot funding from the Pacific Islands Climate Adaptation Science Center, or PICASC. And we started with 3 partners in Hawaii and co-developed what we call climate change, climate variability, and drought portfolios. And in these portfolios, we essentially take a management area. So the example on the figure here is shown for Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. We take a management area and we extract that site-specific information for their management units. So we have climate information that is tailored to just the areas that they work. So you can see here some of the example figures. We have monthly climate information for rainfall and temperature. We have future climate projections for different seasons and different models. We have drought histories, we have rainfall trends, we pulled out fire occurrence data. Basically, whatever we have access to, we try to include it in these portfolios. And we have now developed the code for these that they are now accessible at the push of a button. All we need is the management area, and we can extract the information and produce this 40-page PDF. And our partners have used this in different ways. Hawaii Volcanoes National Park has used this to help plan their outplanting based on some of the future climate information. Another partner used the site-specific information to write grants. And so building on these portfolios, we have also developed lots of fact sheets. So some of these have been site-specific collaborations. So I think these are, again, for Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. We've done fact sheets on what does future climate look like in the national park? How does El Nino impact the national park? So it's all very site-specific. And we brought on a postdoc who worked with her colleagues to translate all of these into Olelo Hawaii. So these have been great biocultural resources that are available on our website. We have, since that initial pilot, have expanded to working across more Pacific Islands. And we had a great partnership with Christine and Doag and Romina King at the University of Guam, and produced 3 fact sheets for Guam. And I have some copies on the table in the back corner there. The wildland fire fact sheet was actually some of Farron's thesis work that we incorporated into the fact sheet. So this has been, I think, really helpful for helping just improve education and awareness on these different climate change and drought related issues. The PDKE, we do a lot of outreach. So we host workshops and give presentations at local meetings. We have one-on-one stakeholder meetings. We present at national conferences. Ryan Longman has done a livestock podcast related to some of our ranching partners. And we've even held an adaptation planning and practices course that was really successful, helping managers think through how to incorporate climate change planning into their activities.
So with, again, help from PyCast, we now have a website that is live. And so all of these fact sheets and portfolios are there. We have now produced portfolios for over 130 different partners in Hawaii. And we're working with the University of Hawaii IT department to automate those. So people can now, it's going to launch very soon where people can click and just get that portfolio for any location in Hawaii. And you'll notice I'm saying Hawaii a lot, but we have some current grants that are helping us expand into other Pacific islands. So I've been showing a lot of logos. The Pacific Drought Knowledge Exchange, yes, was initially funded by PyCast, but we kind of treat our funding situation like this alliance model is what we call it. So we have some funding from PyCast, other funding from NOAA, their National Integrated Drought Information System, or NIDIS. Those are the drought.gov folks. And then other small grants that have come in from other places. So we're really just trying to leverage resources and not reinvent the wheel and just kind of bring everybody into this PDK umbrella. So we have some current NIDIS funding that's, we're developing a decision support tool with the ranchers in Hawaii and working on a drought needs assessment for the US affiliated Pacific Islands. In one of our current PyCast grants, we are doing more work to expand climate information for Guam and American Samoa. And I'll talk more about these daily rainfall maps that we're producing in just a second. And we have a funding proposal that is pending with NOAA NIDIS to look at new drought indicators for agroforestry in the Pacific. So just a quick note on the mapping of rainfall in Guam. We are leveraging all of the work that we've been doing in Hawaii for a long time to make high resolution gridded rainfall maps to bring that to Guam. So we've done some testing to produce monthly maps at 92-meter resolution back to the mid-1950s. And we're almost ready to go ahead and do this for daily rainfall back to about 1980. And we will be making all of these maps and data available on our Hawaii Climate Data Portal. Again, working with the University of Hawaii IT folks to build out a Pacific portal. So we hope that this will all be available later this year and could enable us to create those similar climate portfolios for Guam. And we're also doing this for American Samoa. And any new Mesonet stations or stations that go up, all that data would feed into these maps and make them better. So we're really excited. This would allow us to look at historical drought and site-specific information about rainfall trends and other things. So to sum up, you know, the PDKE is working to facilitate drought knowledge exchange among researchers and managers in the Pacific through these one-on-one meetings and outreach presentations and workshops. And we work to co-produce different drought knowledge products like fact sheets and portfolios, decision support tools, case studies, and lots of different drought information and data. So we are always looking for new collaborations and for folks to get involved. So, you know, if you have ideas for fact sheets or other knowledge products that we can help with, please come and talk to me. If you want to join one of our teams, meet with us every week or quarterly or annually, we're happy to add you to those listservs. So please come and see me if you want to talk about any of that. And again, I have stickers and magnets and fact sheets in the back. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abby. Oh, we have a Zoom question.
From Allison Rudder. Do you know if there is any site-specific riverine flooding data for Guam?
I do not know if there is site-specific riverine flooding data for Guam. That I think would be more of a USGS question to check what kind of stream gauge information that we have. But if developing products like that and really understanding that is a need, we can definitely see how we can bring in some of the newer rainfall data with some of that stream gauge data.
Does anyone know of riverine gauges in the audience that we could provide more guidance to our Zoom members? Okay, it looks like Maria has a couple people. So we'll get with you to post that a couple of responses. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Abby. Please check her booth out. Okay. So next we have Barbara Burkhart from Kurosoni Sengsong and the Guam Native Plant Society. I'll go ahead and make an announcement quick. So just know, I know we're running behind schedule on the presentations, but it looks like we do have some booths set up. So we have 2 more talks and then we'll go into the career fair.
My name is Barbara Burkhart, and I represent in 2024 185 volunteers from the community that came out to the Dededo Limestone Forest Restoration Project. It's a volunteer and community-driven project of Kurosani Sengsong. Our methodology is that we have environmental, youth, and adult programs. We work together to provide resources for youth ages 7 to 18, families, and our volunteers. Our volunteers get something in return for volunteering. We try to be very informational and giving to our adult volunteers so they have a good experience and come back. As the environmental program manager, I'm just amazed at the community involvement. There are quite a few people here in the audience and online that have come out to volunteer, and I thank you. With the youth, many of them come in timid. Youth don't get a chance to go outside. They certainly don't have a chance to plant a native tree, learn what a native tree is, and get their hands dirty, use the tools. And over about a 2-hour period, the most timid person with no pressure usually gets a chance to experience all the tools, hand tools that we provide. So we actually have 12 acres within walking distance. Our community center is 1.3 acres. And inside our 1 acre community garden fence, we've converted many plots over to native plants. And then next door, we have an 11 acre nature park under the agreement with GURA and the Dededo Mayor's Office. The 11 acres is a shallow stormwater basin, and there are many in Dededo that have an equal opportunity for reforestation and establishing native plants. So Justin Hale was our main steward for 7 years. He's now back in the US, but he does all that digital work that he was talking about yesterday online, and talks with us and walks through the forest, on Zoom, on a telephone with us regularly. He identified, and I agree with him, that one of our main goals is to cure local native plant blindness, especially in the Northern Plateau. People don't They don't know what a native plant looks like. They don't know what a duk-duk looks like. They don't know what the fruit of the duk-duk and the seed of the duk-duk looks like. I had an interview with Kelly Marsh Titano last year. And as a middle school student, she lived in this neighborhood and walked by the forest on her way to Benavente Middle School for 2 years. And she didn't know on the right-hand side was a native forest and there were native plants in there. And that's a pretty common comment that we get from our visitors. They don't have a clue what native plant is, and there might be some in their neighborhood. Where did we get our plant list? Came from Justin Hale about 5 years ago. He looked through the science and found a list of native plants in the limestone forest published by Fosberg. I think that's 1970 publication. And he put together a list, and we've had visitors. He schooled himself. He's an MD. He's not a botanist, but he took this on as a hobby for his family. And over the years, he's identified on our spreadsheet 39 natives, 25 are existing, and we had one vine that we added to the list in April of 2024, and CJ Paulino knows what the name is. Did everybody hear that? It doesn't have a local short name, so I'm like clueless. So what I do the past year is I get a big piece of fence that's 3 feet high, and I surrounded that tree and that vine, and I put a white cloth strip on it so that we don't accidentally trim around it or tread on it when we're giving a tour. In addition to the existing species, we've outplanted 14, and we get a lot of, Justin has gone out and sourced native plants, native limestone forest plants on his own. And then many people, including people in the audience, have brought us native plants that are on our list. And since it's all volunteer, not only can you bring it to us, you can go with us on a Saturday morning and plant the plant, choose a place where it goes. So we have the Fosberg list. In addition to that, we hope to attract Fanihi. They aren't that far away. And we're only a couple miles from Anderson and 30 miles away from Rhoda. So hopefully sometime in the future, our 11 acres fully reforested with ironwood and duk-duk. And you can see this is a list that we found of the types of food that Fanihi like to eat. So the blue dashes are plants that are in our forest. So we hope they come and visit us at some time. Again, we're all volunteer supported. You heard yesterday from Justin and Guam Native Plant Society. We do a lot. It takes a lot to describe what we're doing. His work publishing on Facebook, creating an online community, and the Wikipedia lists, I think, are just amazing. So these are the different programs that support the forests in our neighborhood. There's the limestone forest restoration. We've put 20 people through citizen forester training, and we have a couple, including myself, who graduated last year. We've surveyed 100 trees in the last year, and our goal is to survey all native trees on public land within a half mile of our community center. We have a native plant nursery, and our peak of native species was 42 in the nursery. And we had hoped to expand in 2024, but it looks like we found a different person, a different entity to provide our canopy structure for the expansion. So that'll be 2025. And in addition to our forest projects, we look towards the Kaiser Parks. Oops. Sorry. I thought I had a map, but there's 26 HOA Kaiser Parks within a half mile of us. All the parkways are wild with trees, and another opportunity to go in and survey and reforest the trees. And so what I think is successful about our program is that we have big people in small child carts. And when we go out and we plant, we bring our mulch, we bring a 5-gallon bucket of water, we bring our plants, and we have people of all ages that go out, hopefully someone with a little more experience than just enthusiasm, and we go out and plant trees in our cleared areas. I'm gonna switch from representing Kodasani Singtang to being political, and I was shocked that this is political, but I'm gonna say it anyway. I'm a retired architect, and part of my training was in LEED certification of projects, which meant there are points for native plants. So that's how I became familiar with Guam native plants and their value. And these are just some statistics which are shocking. They're totally shocking to me as a retired person that's passionate about Northern Plateau limestone forest plants. There's 150,000 residents on Guam. That includes the military. There's 7.5 parking spaces per person. You add to that driveways in private parking lots like Payless. Add to that all the feeder roads. Talking about a lot of paving that's been paid for, that we pay for out of our tax dollars. There's 131,000 registered cars on Guam. There are 0 trees per person on Guam. There is no public policy that says parks should be planted with trees, that a mature tree has some value and shouldn't be taken down in a public park. Someone with a bulldozer, even though their permit says they have to preserve trees or preserve an area, there is no, once a bulldozer comes in and clears those trees, they're gone. And I haven't seen any fines for people destroying habitat and destroying trees. Maybe you see on the news the tree snails slow down a project. Some people will hate me when I say this. The only entity being held accountable for trees is the military. And we have millions and millions of dollars on military projects, but I haven't seen any, I don't see any, even like 1% of a commitment to save 1 tree per person on Guam, outside of the military base. Political, I'm making these assertions. This is my personal 10-year plan through 2034. And this is where it became political. Guam International Country Club is 1,000 feet from the Yellow Star, which is the nature park, and the Red Heart, which is Kodasani Singsan. The green area on the west side of that property is all mature limestone forest trees. There's a few ornamentals, but it's mostly mature limestone forest trees. Some of it is in Kaiser Parkway land. Some big incursions are actually around Guam Water Works pumping stations. So that's a GWA property, and they've left the trees around it and they're all native. In the northeast corner is a very large grove of duk-duk trees, and there's many ironwood. Up until 10 years ago, Finihi were spotted in this habitat, and they appear to have disappeared now. So this is about 1.5 miles of West Santa Monica Parkway. The yellow dots represent public land, which are stormwater basins, similar to the one we're working in. They all have duk-duk, at least one duk-duk, and the possibility of native trees, native limestone trees. At the intersection of Marine Corps Drive in Santa Monica, there's the food co-op and the Gura property, prime spots to plant trees. The W represents Weddingill Field, and that's one of Christine Bergeron's Guam Forestry future planting areas. It's mostly bare land now. There are 3 schools. Christine at Guam Forestry has been planting native trees at the schools. So my vision, and for some of the people in the room, our vision is that this is, it's citizen involvement, because it's not going to come from Guam. It's not going to come from the federal government. It's the people who drive down West Santa Monica and go, oh my God, we could have a limestone forest parkway with very little effort. We do need trees. We do need people to come out on the 1st and 3rd Saturday of every month to clear and plant. But this is doable. And politics again, I need as many people to stand with me on keeping the GICC property from being turned into a solar farm, which means all of those trees, when they put a solar farm in, they bulldoze corner to corner. There's moorhen in the ponds. These are ponds, and we have recent, and actually Local Fish and Wildlife has published a report that there are moorhens in the ponds. There have been sightings of finihi and 8-spot butterfly, although it's quite likely they have found someplace else to live. So there you go. That's my vision. I hope as many people as possible join me in that. I think that, oh, there we go. This is our poster. As Justin said yesterday, we would like to see our native flora used in promotional materials and graphics for shirts. I'm sure there's a monstera on this, which I abhor, but we have 6 native plants in our banner with native flowers and native berries, and all of these are in the limestone forest, and we hope to see more of that in the future. And that's the end.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Unfortunately, we're out of time for questions, but will you be around all week? Okay, so go ahead and see Barbara if you have further questions about Native Plant Society and Kurosoni Sengsong. So we have our final presentation, but definitely not least, Chief Christine Camacho Ferrin with Guam Department of Agriculture, Forestry, and Soil Resources Division. Let's give her a round of applause.
This talk requires me writing some notes here, just as a safety net. So this, as CJ pulls this up, this talk, can I just start? Okay. This talk is going to cover the Guam Forest System Plan. And so it's drier material, exciting potential, but there's a lot of words. So bear with me through the slides, and then anyone who has questions afterwards, we can unwrap some of that, okay? I don't know my lines. So okay, here we go. So I dressed it up a little bit, but it's pretty much, it's a PowerPoint that's been shared through from the Bureau of Statistics and Plans, Guam Coastal Management Program, your Guam Department of Agriculture. And so we've worked together with the Department of Land Management and again, BSP, to really pull together the education and outreach for the community to understand what this is, what the forest system plan is. Perfect, it's the right one, and its arrows work. Can I use this thing? I might have to stay here, so be cued. All right. For this one, I'm gonna introduce you to the goals of the Guam Forest System Plan, and we're gonna go pretty quick, you guys, I'm sorry, because of the time. So the overall goals are to manage the watersheds, to protect and improve water quality, and all the things that require a healthy watershed. Maintain and enhance biological integrity, to strengthen the economy. So there's very much a look at our economy, our ecosystems, and what do we need for healthy communities, right? As you can see, the quick map, these are the parcels mapped out that are included in the Guam Forest Inventory. The Guam Forest Inventory is a required element, bear with me, for the Guam Forest System Plan, which is required for the Guam Forest Legacy Act of 2012. So an act that required a plan that will require, which includes an inventory that was determined and discussed by leadership from various agencies. The first summit that we had in 2021, where we sat with land management, Chamorro Land Trust, ancestral lands. I actually don't think ancestral lands were in there, but they were invited. And many of the other partners to discuss what will be going into this. The forest inventory, the inventory of lands. It's not a new list. It didn't come out of nowhere. It was part of a parks and conservation inventory. So it already existed. And what the Forest Legacy Act did, requiring the system plan, was take all of that and put it into even more protection. So it's the Department of Agriculture will have authority over the plan, but we do not take full administrative authority of like all of the properties. It just means that if something's going to happen with these parcels, we will be included in those conversations. And in the interim, because there's always master planning across the island. So in the interim of it all, there can be good forestry work. There can be good natural resource work. Because in 20 years, if you have a plan and a plot and still nothing on it, instead of fallow land with dumped cars and chemicals and all kinds of bad use, we can take existing green spaces and make them thriving and healthier green spaces, whatever that may be. Okay, sorry, going off script. The Guam Forest Legacy Act, I already introduced that. Again, it gives jurisdiction over the plan to the Department of Agriculture. There's some language in here. This was recently passed by the Guam legislature. So the forest system plan was passed recently. And language that was added to it was this act is not intended to transfer authority to ag, but it will ensure that the department will be able to review. And then there's adopted forest system plans not intended, I already read that. But it added language here in the memorandum of agreement as to who we will be working with. So it's not just land management, it included government agencies. So it gave us more breadth in the potential for memorandums of agreement that we can enter into more agreements with more partners in government. And then you see the partners listed that I quickly highlighted there. The additional pieces that were added were again, just adding Chamorro Land Trust Commission, ancestral lands. It was sort of understood, but everything is better when it's written down, right? So effective date upon signing. The elements of the plan, again, really quick. It's the inventory of land to include lot number, size, etc. It's a comprehensive and concise definition to the public. It's just the public interest. So it's lands. The reason we talk about the forest system plan, Guam Forest Legacy, is because as resource managers, whatever the resource is, there are parcels of land. You heard Ms. Barbara talk about their project site and other areas of interest. This is an inventory that if we know what's being focused on parcels, then as we start moving to the next phase of this plan, so the very first phase was get the inventory, get the forest system plan, get that passed. We passed it. This next phase that we are in right now is the promulgation of rules and regs for the authorized use of these lands. So certain properties, let's use Codal Conservation Reserve as an example. We know there's off-roading activity taking place in there. I'm not authorizing it. We haven't posted signs, but as the forestry chief, we can put, through the direction of our director, we can shut off access for vehicles, right? We can cut certain types of activity out to let a trail recover from overuse. So there is language in there, and especially if it's fire season, certain activities will want to refrain from encouraging to protect the properties, but it's never to exclude access from the public. That is never the intent. It's just types of activities that we're going to be looking at. The plan must support. So every parcel that you saw, there's a master plan of general activities that will be included in the system plan. These are the types of things we're going to regulate and or look at. But for each piece of land, there's going to be specific management plans because the activity is going to be different from Codal to a park in Dedido to a park to Anau, right? All across the board. So there will be, as funding permits, partnerships grow, opportunities to look at sites and say, here's what we're finding in these particular lots. So maybe we should plan it for this. So know that that's where your review comments will come in when we start having meetings for these particular sites. But it's to promote, these sites must promote education for the purpose of conservation, scientific research, recreation, conservation and preservation, training for agriculture personnel, proposals for collaborations, list of allowable activities, recommendations for sustainability, procedures and protocols. This is the phase we're on, procedures and protocols for identifying government and private owned lands. Oh, privately owned lands can be included in the forest system plan. There is a line that's in there now. So conservation easements. So when we start thinking about REPI money, new funding that's coming in, federal forest legacy, federal program. These are programs that allow for, and Sentinel, allow for the acquisition of conservation lands. And so it could be in perpetuity, we pay a landowner and their land gets rolled into conservation, or they hold title and just keep that land in conservation as an easement. So these are options now that can be added to the inventory. Through the process, who reviews this? You saw this slide before, and this was for every program in your forestry division, there is a committee or advisory council. So the forest stewardship, what are we calling? Coordinating committee. Sorry. The Forest Stewardship Coordinating Committee, this is the group that's identified that will be part of helping to look at these rules and regs and overall management activities. So I said it before, the opportunity to participate in these committees, it's there. So contact Rudy Estoy. He is our Forest Stewardship Program Coordinator and Program Manager. Asia Lynn Omilau is our Cooperative Fire Program Coordinator. Shaylin Salas is our coordinator for UCF. And then Forest Health, I'm recruiting. Okay. Sustainability for the plan. This is forest and open spaces, management practices, improving forest health, addressing issues like erosion and sedimentation, providing for ecotourism, recreational activities, because for all of our conservation needs, if we are not addressing the number one thing, people want to eat it, they want to use it, and they want to be able to have access and play on it. So in our conservation plans, we have to be able to address and balance these needs. Why do we protect Finihi? People like to eat it. When you look at the core, where there's people, we want to eat it or consume it. And so we have to be able to think broadly. We're protecting for the sake of, we need pollinators, we need dispersers out there. But the grander community looks at a resource like, can I eat it? Can I live in it? Can I build off of it? Can I use it? So where's the balance? So thankfully we have this forest system plan, which helps us come to that balance. Then there's biosecurity and invasive species control, which is, identifying, targeting landscape level control work, implementation of biosecurity programs, wildfires, installation, maintenance of fire or fuel breaks, develop community wildfire protection plans. If you have a site that burns regularly and you want to work with your village to help mediate the impact of fire on across your watershed or your project area, you should talk to us about a CWPP, Community Wildfire Protection Plan. And we can look at this from a village level, from a northern, central, or southern perspective. Let's see how we can do it for Guam. And then you saw this slide previously. These are the key issues that were identified in the Guam Forest Action Plan. As you've seen, all presentations, I've linked back to the Guam Forest Action Plan because we need to prioritize our work. And what we want to say for the Forest System Plan, we want to make sure that the funding that we're competing for, that we are addressing the needs in the Forest Action Plan so we can secure that funding. And you're going to want to reference this in your competitions for funding. Okay, we'll skip. Oh, I just had another recap on the slide on Osgado. Some more images, more images. There you go. That's the, I ended. It's the Forest System Plan. It should work. I tested it this morning. That was like super fast. Any questions? Yes, Haldra.
I'm wondering, since they have plants in the State Wildlife Action Plan, does the State Wildlife Action Plan and the Guam Forest System Plan talk to each other at all?
You guys heard the question? Do the wildlife action plans or the wildlife action plan and the forest action plan talk to each other? Yes. Yes. We do reference the the wildlife action plan in our Guam FAP, and I'm pretty sure they reference us in theirs. Any questions? Right now, no. So right now, agencies with the regulatory authorities are reviewing our potential lists of what we can enforce, because we cannot write something that we do not have legislative authority to enforce. So we're going through that. And where the public comes into play is when we start looking at individual parcels. Let's talk about Ono. It's not in the plan right now because it was excluded because of that tenuous relationship between properties that may be going back to private, and then there's that public. But there are other areas, Bolanas, Koto, the other areas that are included. But we may want to bring in the partners in the community. How do you use your space? As a village, how do you use your space? And what can this management plan for this parcel support what you do and what you want as a community for your green space, right? And then we still have to look through the lens of, are we protecting the actual natural resources on the ground? And what can we do to sustain that? The mayors have been invited to every step of the process. And so the council's there, they've reviewed it. And many of the parcels that pop up, of course, fall into mayor's jurisdictions. And so we opened the door to ensure that if they want to have one-on-one conversations so they can better understand the plan, that's there too. We just presented to the mayor's council last week, reintroducing to forestry. And so that's there. I cannot see. Any other questions?
I had a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So I think you had mentioned earlier, like if you're a researcher and you're doing any type of research that's pertinent to forest work, you should come see you guys. But what does that look like? Like reaching out to you and saying hello, having a meeting, or just sending you their paper or their plan? Or
You talk to me. Everybody's talking to me. I'm so approachable. Just give me an email or WhatsApp me. I'm usually pretty liberal with my cell phone, but we'll refrain today. But if you email me or come into the office, not just me, please excuse me for the me. Reach out to your Department of Agriculture and loop in, Chelsea, if it's a big project. If it's something that you're working on a park and you're just trying to find out some information, email me, call the office, stop in, and we can schedule a date for a conversation if sitting down right then and there isn't quite an option. If it's something that you've done some research and you want to share it, email it. Email it. You can walk in a thumb drive if you want, but it's just making sure that, the wildlife team, when you send me something, send forestry something, I immediately forward that to the division chiefs of the Guam Department of Agriculture. We do not gatekeep anything. When I am given resources, I automatically copy director, admin, and chiefs and say, disseminate and share with your personnel.
Hey, Christine, sorry. So the SWAP team was kind of talking about cooperation at and thinking about the wildlife action plan at the landscape scale for the archipelago. I'm wondering what the Guam forestry communication is like with the CNMI forestry team, and like, is there a relationship there?
We've
and
always had
cooperative projects. Yeah.
Yeah. So relationships between CNMI and Guam, I'm going to do one even bigger. So I'm the current chair for the Pacific Island Forestry Committee. And so the Pacific Island Forestry Committee is representatives come from the different forestry and agriculture offices across the Pacific Islands. It's inclusive of American Samoa, and so all of Micronesia. And what we do is when we do meet, we look at policy, we look at projects, and how can we share the load. So when the Forest Service towards the islands, we start discussing what type of technical work do you have happening on your island for forestry, and how can we leverage and or share some of this experience. And so through the Pacific Island Forestry Committee, we take our stuff, we have a voice at the Council of Western State Foresters, which is the bigger group of all of the state foresters, and then the Coalition of Forestry Leadership. So we do get state, we're not a state, but we get a state seat and we show up at those meetings. So yes, we've always had the conversation open with CNMI, but we've also had that open for the rest of our Micronesian brothers and sisters. Any other questions? So if you didn't know that, check out PIFC unless the site was banned or closed. But we created a full on, that's why when I say share your publications, we created a database of resources for forestry centric work covering biosecurity, fire, everything. And we're pulling those resources so we move with the best informed science, work. I mean, we're moving with that. But if you hold it and gatekeep it, don't complain to me. Okay?
Thank you, Cesar Swansea, so much, Chief Christine. So that concludes our last presentation session for the plant ecology and conservation. And now we're gonna move into our career fair. It looks like most of the folks are set up here. So thank you all for your attention, and yeah, go check out some career booths. Thank you.
Thanks, Christiana. Yeah, go ahead and you can start making your move. I'm just making a few follow-up announcements and reminders for folks. We still have a couple of field trips that have a lot of spaces. The Taguan and Ascadao, if you want to see some of these restoration efforts on the ground, these would be great opportunities to get in the field and see that. And a reminder, we do have trivia tomorrow night at the Hare and the Hound in Anigua, starting about 7. And Thursday night, we have a banquet at the Guam Museum and bring friends. With food and drinks will be provided. Thanks, everybody.